Good afternoon, Sean.
Good afternoon, Bern. A bit later than we planned, but
It is a bit later, yes. Now, normally, politicians, in this case, British politicians, going to visit Ukraine and getting their photos taken and wearing their smart suit and coming back trying to impress the British people, I wouldn't particularly be interested in. Probably you wouldn't either. On this occasion, a couple of interesting things actually happened, didn't they? So Grant Shapps, UK Defence Secretary, and the Chief of Defence, Tony Radakin, actually went to Ukraine, and they got wind that Putin had worked out where they were going to be, and things changed.
in a way, it's not a surprising story. But yes, the two of them a couple of weeks back had planned a visit in. They were traveling from train from Poland into Kyiv. Then they decided to go to visit Odessa, which had recently come under attack. But they heard that the intelligence suggested Kremlin knew that they were going, and all of a sudden there was a And interestingly, Grant Shapps immediately was angry that he was being targeted or potentially being targeted by the Russians. And he went, "Are you really surprised? The West is providing a whole load of weapons support, as is the UK. That, to my money, would make him a completely legitimate target." But I think what was fascinating behind the scenes is actually, why was CDS there? Why was the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Radakin, going in there? Because it's long been reported that the West has been trying to help Ukraine with not just providing weapons, but also telling them how to fight, the tactics of how to use these high-tech weapons that the West is providing, which sounds a bit arrogant. Why would you tell the Ukrainians how to fight? But behind that, high-tech weapons were brought in specifically because you fight differently with them. Things like bullets and shells, it's an attritional battle. You line up against each other. I'm a bigger army than you. We slug it out in the battlefield. That's not how the West chooses to fight. It wants to use these high-tech weapons, and you use them in a different way.
So, yeah, I'll say, I think the UK call it doctrine.
Yeah,
so the policies
exactly.
they have already
Yeah.
worked out over many, many years have a particular way of deploying not just the weapon, but how it sits in the general context of the objectives they've got. So the idea is that they sort of bolster up the education for Zelensky.
Yeah, and I think there's always been... Remember when the fights for Bakhmut and the fights for Avdiivka, there was a lot of conversation. The Americans particularly, probably the Brits as well, were advising Ukraine not to get dragged into a war of attrition. That's not the way to fight. Use these weapons smarter. Now, clearly, I think there's a lot of brainstorming that goes on, a lot of ideas exchanged. Ultimately, it's up to the Ukrainians to decide how to do this. What I think was fascinating about this particular visit, though, which didn't really hit the news, there are a couple of reports about it, was suggestions that at a grand strategy level, rather than the tactics, strategy level, was a discussion with Ukraine about how to fight Russia strategically.
Okay.
Now, what do I mean by that?
Well, can I?
Shoot.
So this sounds like it's going to be quite big. So can we just hold it and just reverse a bit? Because there's something else to just pick up. Then I want to listen to what you're about to say. So when you were just saying, so Putin got wind of where they were going to be, my mind went, not that I wasn't listening to you, Sean, of course I was, my mind went to, so what was actually going on? Putin's on the phone to somebody going, hey, guess what? Grant Shapps from the UK is going to be in Odessa or somewhere. Let's go get him. Now, that's fine, because that's what you kind of thing you'd expect to have. What's interesting about this is the UK have intercepted some sort of comms in the middle of Russia and picked it up. That is interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's been a couple of news reports around this sort of story. There was a talk about remember, was it the German Air Force seniors that their comms were intercepted talking about the Taurus missile? Now this one. And to be brutally honest, a lot of what happens with intercepts is not talked about because you don't want to betray how you've got that information. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if one of the reasons that we haven't heard about this for a couple of weeks and it's only been breaking recently is the very nature of how we knew.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be a surprise to any of our viewers that, both Russia and the UK, and indeed China and America, have spies everywhere. There's listening, there's watching, there's intercepts going on everywhere. That's how the intelligence folk do their business.
Well, now he knows. He'll probably be using pigeon post next.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think what's fascinating, it's a bit like was it the Enigma machine in the Second World War? Once we'd cracked it, the challenge then is: do you actually operate on everything that you now? Because you now show that you must have broken the code. Therefore, they now put something else in place. And part of the value for Enigma was, actually, we're going to have to let some of the German plans come to pass.
And people die.
Yeah. Because we want to preserve that secret. Yeah. And in a way, sometimes you don't necessarily act on all the information you've got because you don't want to betray how you know about that stuff.
So Grant Chapp's got lucky then, really?
Well, I think there's also, in context, there was another visit a few days earlier, and I think Zelensky had missed by about a block a missile strike, which had unsettled Zelensky. So, and that was around the Odessa region as well. So, like all these things, we hear one part of the story. I suspect there is a richer part of the story here, that Zelensky probably is quite a prime target for.
I would think so.
For Putin, I suspect.
Right. Okay. So now we get the big interesting strategic injection from the UK to.
Yeah, because it wasn't widely reported, but there were reports coming out about the UK starting to influence their strategy. Now, the difference between tactics is you're going to drive up that hill, or you're going to flank it, or you're going to, that's an individual battle. Strategy is looking at the whole of Ukraine. What are we going to do in this part of the Ukraine? What are we going to do here? So up till now, with the Donbass, it's largely been defensive. The front line around Zaporizhzhia go on the offense, and around the Dnieper River, see what we can do. I'm being flippant for effect. It sounds like, though, given the shortage of weapons, given Russia is on the front foot in the Donbass, what's fascinating, it appears that the Brits were turning around to the Russians and saying, you should actually just defend, give ground if you have to in the Donbass, let the Russians lose loads and loads of people, focus your offense on Crimea. Now, when I heard that, I went, hang on a minute, for the last 2 years, we've been commentating that Crimea is a fortress. Even the Second World War, huge number of troops tried to take it, almost impossible to do. So why would you try? But then you have this sort of light bulb moment of sort of saying, yeah, but at the moment, why would Russia stop? At the moment it stops fighting, the West will pile in, provide security for Ukraine and help start to rebuild it. It'd be really difficult to restart again. So there's a question about why wouldn't Russia just keep pushing on? If, however, you could threaten Crimea, and it's the port of Sevastopol that's the crown jewels for Russia. They've fought hundreds of years ago and lost hundreds of thousands of lives to secure Crimea. They will not want to lose that. Where's the Russian Black Sea Fleet at the moment?
Right at the back.
It's been pushed away by the Ukrainians. All of a sudden now, Crimea is a bit more vulnerable, not to an onslaught by 100,000 Ukrainian troops, but for asymmetric attacks, those drone attacks, odd amphibious attacks, doing odd attacks here, there and everywhere, cutting off the lines of communication, maybe cutting off the bridge that links. You could just see now that you could do
actually getting worried.
Really do a clever campaign. And if you were to be effective, you don't have to take Crimea. You have to demonstrate that you might be able to. And I'm not saying that would stop the war, but it might just be enough that once Russia has finished doing what it needs to do in Donbass, that it would go, actually, I need to stop now, because if I don't stop now, there's a grave risk that I lose the crown jewels here.
Yeah, which wouldn't look good back home either.
Not at all. Not at all.
Zelensky's been waving a flag around, so I'm going to get 1 million drones. They're cheap. I mean, £50,000 a pop. Are going to get cheaper and more effective. He's already demonstrated he can do not just become an irritant, but actually do serious damage. You throw enough your favourite saying. Quantity is
enough of them.
Well, schwack is one. Quantity is quality, which is the serious one, which is throw enough at a target and they just cannot defeat you. So it is, it's credible.
It is credible. And the other thing that's, I think, interesting is that so the West is undoubtedly supporting Zelensky in a number of ways. Part of that is that the borders of Ukraine, the airspace is bristling with Western assets that are watching, looking. I have no doubt that Western satellites are also looking down and providing intelligence. There will be a lot of intelligence that could be provided around Crimea.
This is definitely one to watch, isn't it? Because it feels a bit like an end game. And if you couple it with the fact that the money, I said the money last week, you said, well, it's not so much the money, it's the weapons, probably both. Germany hasn't sent its missiles yet. America's still arguing. The arguments will go on probably till the election in November, maybe to inauguration in January. Maybe the West are beginning to say, actually, it's going to be very difficult in the near term, 12 months, to continue with all the support you need. So we need to create an end game. Maybe this is it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what the conversation is around. It's around part of military strategy is generally looking at what's your enemy's, they call it centre of gravity. It's the one thing the enemy does not want to lose. And I think what's interesting, if this story is true, the one thing that Russia will not want to lose is Crimea.
Yeah.
And even though it's a hard ask to get Crimea to take Crimea, as you say, with 1 million drones, with Western support, with asymmetric attack, I'd be worried if I was Putin.
Yeah.
And a concerted effort could make life very, very difficult. And as you say, one to watch.